Sydney?
Good evening. Y'all could have your seat. We'll get started.
Right there.
Today is Thursday, September 19th, 2019. I now call this Board of Education meeting to order. Mrs. Lane, will you call the roll, please?
Mr. Begley?
Here.
Mr. Birding?
Present.
Mrs. Gundrum?
Here.
Mrs. O'Neill?
Here.
Mrs. Shorter?
Would y'all please stand, and Mrs. Gundry, will you lead us in the pledge, please?
I pledge allegiance
To the flag.
Of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mrs. Gundrum. First item on our agenda is presentations, resolutions. Mr. Smith?
Thank you, Mr. Birding. Mr. Birding, members of the board, we do have 3 presentations scheduled this evening. Our first presentation will be made by members of our equity leadership team. So at this time, I'll turn it over to Gina Gentry-Fletcher and Denise Hayes.
Thank you, Mr. Smith, and good evening, board members and team. I am happy, very excited to honor this community member who has done some wonderful things for our equity leadership team. I'm going to ask Lawrence Jones, Mr. Lawrence Jones, to come up. He's a parent. We can clap for him to
Yeah.
feel some of the dedication. Affectionately known as LJ. He has been an asset to our equity leadership team, has given a perspective from that parent view, challenges us, and has done some wonderful, we've had some wonderful dialogue with him. Since I've been here since 2011, Lawrence has been the co-chairperson with Mrs. Hayes of the ELT. So he's had a long ride and has decided to kind of step aside. He's going to stay on the committee. We won't let him leave. And I'd also like to call up Mr. Dennis Williams, who is going to be replacing. Dennis is going to be replacing Lawrence as the co-chair, so he'll be working with Denise Hayes and myself and the other members of the equity leadership team. So we welcome you, and we thank you for all of your leadership. I've learned a lot from you, so thank you.
Any comments from the board?
Just want to thank you for your service to the committee and to the schools.
Yeah, I know, Mr. Jones, you've been doing this a lot of years, and you've made a tremendous difference in our school system, so thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next presentation is a school spotlight on Central Elementary. At this time, I'll turn it over to our principal, Mrs. Carrie Gallen.
Good evening. Thank you for allowing us to come and tell you a little bit about our wonderful school. We are very excited because we have a new assistant principal this year. His name is Kareem Sanders, and he is piloting a really neat program, and we brought some of our students to show you a little bit about what they are going to be up to all year long. So I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Sanders.
Good evening.
Good evening.
On behalf of Ms. Gallo, myself, to the Fairfield City Board of Education, Mr. Billy Smith, our superintendent, we want to thank you for having us this evening so we can give you some overview of our mentorship program, Men of Destiny. Why do we mentor? To train, to motivate, to build success, to give direction, for coaching, support, and overall to have a goal to develop these young men to be productive citizens in the city of Fairfield City one day as they transition into being young men. That's why we do it. Our goal at Central Elementary for the Men of Destiny Mentorship Program, we want to provide these young men with exposure and experience that they might not have access to in their day-to-day life. But our goal as Men of Destiny mentors is to provide exposure and experience and to give them opportunities that will change their life forever. What will that take? It will take discipline, consistency, and hard work. My job as an educator is to be a change agent in the community of Fairfield City Schools and Fairfield City. That's what we have to be. We have to be the pillars of the community and to help these young men understand that education extends beyond the walls of Central Elementary. That's what a change agent is in the community of Fairfield. We want to let you know that we care for you. We care for you, and we will do for you to make sure that you're successful in your walk of life. I want to introduce here soon some of the mentors, but one of the mentors that we have will be working with our young people is Mr. Phillips. He's our head custodian at the school. He wears multiple hats. Anything I need, I can always lean on him. He'll come up and tell you some of the activities that we'll be participating in this year.
I'll let you drive it. Thank you so much for your time. We will be meeting once a month to plan activities and to organize each activity with the kids so that we can maximize our opportunity to speak their language, grow them into the young men that we hope that they will be the best role models that we can be for them, and to access for them opportunities to experience things that they would not otherwise. Things as simple as a movie and a cookout where we can spend quality time with them, to UC football games, to high school basketball games, to trips to community events that they would not otherwise have an opportunity to go to on a normal, everyday basis. Our hope is to be the best role models we can be, to step forward with activities of this type, to learn an awful lot from them, and to provide to them a chance to see a more varied view of the world.
At this time, we'll have Mr. Riley Ponton. He's one of our mentors, and he will give you a breakdown of who all will be mentoring the young man.
Thank you for giving us the time to explain what this whole thing's going to be about. So first off, we have obviously Mr. Kareem Sanders, he's the vice principal down at Central Elementary. Not present today is Mr. Gary Smith. He is the physical education teacher, also down at Central. Standing back here is Mr. Landon Zellers. He is an educational assistant at Central and also a student at University of Cincinnati. Not present is Mr. Ed Wooten. He's the music teacher down at Central Elementary. I think Cameron's here, but he will also be joined by Mr. Cameron Sanders. He's a 7th grade student at Crossroads Middle School. He will be our kind of ambassador, middle ground for these students that we may as well not be able to reach as well. They will listen to a kid their age better than an adult. Not present is Mr. Andy Weiss. He's a 1st grade teacher at Central Elementary. You already met Mr. Bob Phillips, head custodian, and I am Mr. Riley Ponton. I am an EA at Central Elementary and also a student at Miami University.
Now, at this time, we'll have a few mentees come up for a brief reflection. We have Mr. Tyler Flower.
The mentor group means to me is that I can help the people in need and meet and having fun with my principal and other kids that I have never met. It also means that I can hold this for the rest of my life and do other activities with younger kids and learn from new people.
Hi, my name is Emil Moore. I'm in this program because I like to help people, and I like to help, and that's it.
Good evening. My name is Joshua Darks. I am a 4th grader at Central Elementary. I am glad to be in the mentor program. The mentor program means a lot to me because I get to spend time with our kids and adults. I am also glad to be in the mentor program because it is going to help me make new friends and do fun things. I like having Mr. Sanders as an adult I can go to when I need someone to talk to or am having a bad day. Having a mentor means a lot to me.
Again, that takes a lot of confidence, fellas, to step up here and speak like that. Good job. Again, I don't want you to think that our work will go in vain. The pictures you see on this slide here is previous work that I've done in Georgia, as well as some of the things we've already done here in Fairfield. Just this past weekend, Joshua and Tyler had the opportunity to attend PNG Day at Kings Island with me and my family. They had a ball. I think my blood pressure was 200 over 100 after all the roller coasters we participated on. But again, the things that we're talking about doing, as you can see, last year I took a group to a Florida State football game. We attended different community events, Black History programs and church events, and feeding the homeless, and several things we did to be vested, make sure we're vested and embedded into the community. So those will be some of the things that we'll do here as well, and we look forward to it. Again, we want to cultivate and nurture these young men to be productive citizens when they transition into the community. At this time, I think that's it. Do we have any questions? At this time, we have any questions, and hopefully we can have an answer for you.
Questions or comments from the board?
I just have a comment. First of all, you all are very well-dressed and well-spoken. I get nervous when I get up behind that podium, and you guys did amazing. So you should be very, very proud of yourselves. And thank you for giving and being a mentor and being that change agent for younger students. I can't thank you enough. It reminds me a little bit of my favorite teacher growing up. Her name was Mrs. Lucas. And she was an English teacher, but she taught us all, it was just something that was important to her, for us to know table manners. And so we had to learn like where your fork went and where your spoon went and how to properly sit. And even though it seemed, I didn't understand the importance of it then, it was something that you have to experience to learn. And a lot of times kids don't have those experiences to learn. And so that's what you're providing them is opportunities that they wouldn't have otherwise. And that makes a lifelong impact on them, so thank you.
Again, thank you. If there's no further questions, we appreciate your time. You have a great evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen. You did a fine job. I know that Joshua was a little nervous outside because his mother wrote really big on the paper, so he said I had a lot to read because it was written really big. So you did a fantastic job, and thank you, Mr. Cream, for bringing this to the Central Elementary. It's going to be I'm looking forward to seeing what results come out of this. So thank you very much.
Yeah, if I would add one more thing, the state report cards just came out, and often schools, ours as well, is accused of teaching toward the testing that has to be done. And I didn't hear anything about math or science here. I heard you talking about caring for these young people and mentoring these young people, and that's special. Thank you.
And I would like to add is, research states that there's a direct correlation with relationships and student achievement. So before we can move the bar achievement-wise, we want to build the necessary relationship to be successful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mrs. Gunn? So at this time, if you came for the presentation for Central, this would be a great time if you'd like to leave the board meeting. You don't have to sit through all of our boring details. Okay, Mr. Smith?
All right, thank you. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to Mrs. Lane and let her introduce our special guest that we have with us here this evening.
Thank you. Gentlemen, if you wouldn't mind coming to the podium. We have some very important people in the room today. They are going to share with the public how they are going to save our residents lots of money over a long period of time, but we're going to talk about advanced refunding of some bonds. And we have with us tonight Mr. John Payne from Bradley Payne Advisors, who serves as our municipal advisor. We have Andrew Lasky from RBC Capital Markets here that will serve as our underwriter for this project, and Mr. Tom Wilson, who is our bond counsel from Dinsmore and Shoal. Very important people, all have parts in this. They tell me what to do. So I'm glad to have them here with us tonight to explain to the board and to the public some great information. Mr. Payne, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, it's nice to be here again, and good to see those of you that I knew before, and thank you for having us. I've heard this is important stuff we want to talk about, but I have to say that last presentation sort of puts all that in perspective. And I was a little disappointed. I didn't think I'd be way underdressed compared to the previous presenters as well. That was really nice. We have a situation similar to the last time where you can refinance some bonds for savings to taxpayers. This is a sort of refinancing that doesn't put money or cash into the school district's coffers. It really just lowers future tax payments for the public on their property taxes for bonds. We actually did this back in 2014, and the bonds that were refinanced then can be refinanced again, believe it or not. And so I have a little handout for you, and as we go along, I'll bring these gentlemen in to explain their roles. And Tom, you may have your own presentation, I don't know, but I'll start. Okay. Well, you're counsel, so you tell me what to do, when to do it. So what you see in front of you on the first page is an interesting little graph. It's just the last 10 years of taxable U.S. Treasury rates, the 10-year and the 30-year. This is simply to set this up to let you know that you can see on the far right that we've plumbed the bottom of where they've been over those 10-year period. This is important to us for a couple of reasons. One is the lower interest rates, the better your savings on this refinancing we're going to talk about. And second, this refinancing, because the federal government doesn't believe that you ought to be able to use tax-exempt bonds twice for refinancing, this refinancing has to be taxable. A little higher rates, somewhat of a penalty to the district. That's a federal tax law change that was made a few years ago. What year was that, Tom? Do you remember?
December of 17.
December of 17. So if you talk to your Congress people, I don't know. But this really is just a pictorial to let you see what the opportunity is and what's driving the opportunity. The real meat of this, I think, is on the next page. It's a summary of the bonds that are eligible to be refinanced. It's about $56.8 million. The amount expected to be refinanced is about $50 million. And the reason the others aren't expected to be refinanced is because they just don't create savings. Okay, so they're not good eligible bonds to be refinanced. The final maturity will stay the same for the existing bonds and the new refinancing bonds, so they go out to 2044. None of that will change. Typically with these refinancings, we try to make sure that the payment pattern is the same as it was before, and that's exactly what we're doing here. So no games being played, that sort of thing, we're not pushing it back, we're not bringing it up, any of that sort of stuff. It's going to look pretty much the same. The estimated net interest cost for the new bonds are around 3.35%. The interest rate on the old bonds is 5%. So you can see where the difference in the savings is coming from. Over the life of these bonds, the estimated savings is about $7.5 million today. This is really an estimate. Things move fast in this world, especially today in the markets. That is, as you can see the footnote below, for about $5 million on a present value basis, which is a calculation we use in the industry to make sure we're always comparing apples to apples. And it's also a number we use to look at targets as to whether or not a refinancing really is something that makes sense for the district right now. On that point, I want to be real clear. This financing is, Municipal refinancings are complex by their nature. This one is about doubly so, maybe more. It's a taxable refinancing. The proceeds that we borrow now to refinance the bonds can't be used to pay off the old bonds for about 4 years. And so they have to be put in escrow then. And when they're in escrow until they can be used to pay off the old bonds, they lose money because the cost of these bonds is more than they can earn while they're in escrow. It's called negative arbitrage. It hurts the savings. The other thing, of course, is we can't do tax exempt unless we waited until the call date on this 4 years from now, which kind of time we could, and tax exempt rates, if all things stayed equal, would be better, but they don't. So in the industry, they've created targets for when it makes sense to wait or when it makes sense to go ahead and refinance. These are not written in stone. They differ among professionals. Nancy will tell you that I've got one target and maybe the government finance officer has another one. Mine's a little more stringent than theirs. And it has to do with the fact that this particular refinancing opportunity, as each day passes, if the market stayed the same, would pick up savings. The problem is the markets don't stay the same. So what's the right target? Nancy and I have talked about, typically it's 3 to 5% present value savings. We've talked about 8 to 10. So we're like maybe 2 to 3 times higher to make up for these things that tell me I know from having seen this so many years that as each day goes by, if rates don't move that much, your savings would go up, and maybe it would be a better decision 4 years from now if we had waited. So I'm going to tell you that we're getting close to the edge of that target. And so what you are going to consider tonight, resolution-wise, is authorizing this, but I think Mrs. Lane and I will confirm that if rates fall or rates rise a little bit and things start to look like instead of 9.8% present value saving, maybe 7, we're probably not doing this. It would be my recommendation not to do it, and we'd have to have meetings and talk about it. I just think there's no magic to this. It's a cost-benefit analysis, but I have to say it's gut. And now there are some things mathematically going on, that tell me it would be better to wait if we were below that target, but it just doesn't always work that way. So I just want to let you know that we're watching this daily, and we will obviously keep everybody posted. We're scheduled right now to sell the bonds on the 17th of October. That may get delayed a week for some factors going on with a program that the state has authorized for the bonds to lower their rate. But that's the target right now, and we'll be watching it every day. There will be some expense incurred when you get your rating. If you get your rating and interest rates go through the roof, you're going to pay your rating. Okay? And so just want to get all that on the table. Great opportunity. It's $7.5 million right now. We don't see this very often. So hopefully rates will stay or get even lower, and we'll have a better result than what you see on this paper. The last 2 pages are really designed just to show you the other bonds that you have outstanding now, plus these bonds, what the payments look like, and then the final page is what they would look like after the refinancing, if it looked like today, like what we see today. And I would refer you on those pages to the far right-hand column where you see millage, and it goes 4.5, 4.5 in that range, and then drops significantly, and that's the no additional millage situation that I think Mrs. Lane has talked to you about. And you can see when that happens. Okay, so if you have any questions about that, we've done full presentations on that. I'm happy to come back. With that, I'm going to just, with respect to the participants that are here, because I feel like I'm hogging everything here, and I apologize for that. When you sell bonds, they're assets. There are investors all over this country that want them. Okay? There may even be investors outside of this country that want them now because they are taxable on this refunding. And The bonds actually get, because it's 50 million, it's too big just for one loan. They get cut into pieces and sold by maturity for all the way out to 2044. Each different year is a different bond. It's like an estate auction where you see silverware here, the dining room furniture here, all these different things that mean different things to people. Well, that's how bonds work. Those things get cut up in our numbers. That's what we do, and then we pull it all together to give you one average rate. In order to sell all that stuff, just like at the auction, you have to have an auctioneer, someone that knows all these investors, the bridge to these investors, someone that knows how to market them and how to put the right interest rate on them. That auctioneer is, in our business, what we call the underwriter, okay? Andrew Lasky represents the underwriter, which is RBC Capital. We're also working with Kent Cashel there, who was unable to show up tonight. I'm going to bring Andrew up here in just a second. He'll make some comments. But I want to also just reference Tom Wilson and the firm of Dinsmore and Scholl. You've known Tom, many of you, forever, a long time, not forever, but a long time. And a couple of things investors need to know and want to know before they'll ever buy your securities, that is, lend you money. They want to know that if you're saying that they're legal under Ohio law, that they really are, okay? They also want to know if they're tax exempt, which in this case they're not, that they are. Well, in order to get these opinions, they need a lawyer nationally recognized to tell them that the bonds are legal under the state of Ohio. You need their services to make sure everything you do, including what you have before you tonight, is legal under the state of Ohio. And Tom's guidance is irreplaceable. I mean, it's essential to our process. So with that, are there any questions for me? I'm sticking around. I just wanted to introduce Andrew. Andrew, if you want to say anything about the underwriting process or anything.
Sure. Andrew Lasky at RBC Capital Markets. First, thanks for the opportunity to speak to you. Our firm has worked with the district for over 30 years, and we really appreciate that long-term relationship that we've built with the district over the years, financing all the buildings, and as John mentioned, a couple of refinancings over the years. So that is why we're here. Obviously, John gave you a pretty good synopsis of the opportunity. What you're authorizing tonight is the ability for the financing team to keep working forward, to obtain a credit rating, and to continue to analyze this opportunity to make sure it makes sense through the various criteria that John talked about in detail, and only move forward if it meets that criteria established by the district and your advisor. As the bond underwriter, our main job, we all wear multiple hats. Tom, your bond lawyer, takes the lead on the offering documents and legal documents. John is the fiduciary of the district and advisor. And myself, we are responsible for selling your bonds, investments to investors around the country. Obviously, we all work cooperatively on all these, but those are the main roles. I'm on the banking side, so I work with the district preparing for the sale, and then our sales, trading, and underwriting, which is headquartered in New York, is responsible for selling those bonds. So thank you for the opportunity to come here, and let's turn it over to Tom.
Thank you, Andrew. I'm the boring details they warned you about earlier. As John and Andrew mentioned, I serve as bond counsel to the district, and it's a pleasure to be here tonight. John gave a very good summary of our role. We take the lead in drafting the legislation that you have in front of you, the official statement that will be used to offer the bonds, prepare all the paperwork, the actual bonds themselves, so at the end of the day we can offer to deliver to the market our legal opinion that everything's legal binding and in this case taxable. But just to perhaps go through some of the highlights of the resolution, it's a not to exceed amount of $56,885,000. As John mentioned, it'll probably be less than that because not every maturity generates savings. This resolution sets out parameters for the sale, not to exceed interest rate, not to exceed final maturity of 2044, and authorizes the treasurer to essentially take the issue to market with the advice of municipal advisor and bond counsel, to sell the bonds to the underwriter RBC on a date that's selected. And if the market moves the wrong way, there's no obligation to move forward. It'll be a game day decision of whether it goes forward or not. We have target dates, but it's the municipal market moves constantly throughout the day. So if the savings aren't there on the day that's selected, we'll wait and hope things get better. On the other hand, if we have everything lined up and the rates are going our way, maybe we move earlier. So this authorizes the structure. One of the things, and John mentioned it, is it authorizes an application to the State Department of Education to use what's known as the State Intercept program. This is a program that you file a lot of paperwork with the Department of Education, and if approved, bonds will essentially have a rating of the same as the state of Ohio. The idea here is that if for some reason funds were insufficient to make the debt service payments on the bonds, the registrar and paying agent would essentially capture state foundation payments and use that for payment of debt service. So it's another security for bondholders. That program's been around quite a long time. Knock on wood, I've yet to see it actually used, because these are voted unlimited tax general obligation bonds of the school district. So every year, the Board of Education tells the county auditor and treasurer what needs to be collected in terms of debt service for that year, and the millage is set to collect that much and then some. So it would have to be a pretty dark day if we actually had to use the State Intercept program, but it's a helpful tool to get a higher rating, and thus, the higher the rating, the lower the interest rate when the bonds are sold. It authorizes application for a rating, an underlying rating. Typically, the rating agency will rate the bonds based on the intercept, and then also provide an underlying rating based solely on the credit of the school district. There will be an escrow trustee, as John said. These bonds aren't callable for quite some time, so the proceeds of these bonds end up being invested in typically treasuries or state and local government securities held by an escrow trustee, and they will be responsible for paying the bondholders that have bonds that have been refunded. Authorizes the official statement, which is the document that's used to sell the bonds. Nancy's done a fabulous job of pulling together all the information. It's a really, if you haven't had a chance to take a look at it, you should. It's a nice statistic-loaded document that spells out a lot of the detail about the district. I've had a number of board members comment that it's useful to actually learn some hidden facts about the district. So that, in a nutshell, is the resolution. Happy to take any questions about the resolution or any part of the process.
Any questions from the board?
Yeah, I think it's very difficult to time the stock market. It sounds like it's just as difficult to time the municipal bond market. There was great volatility just this week in the money market rate, and if there's going to be further quantitative easing, Fed rate cuts, all this, how do we?
This is where the lawyer gets out of the way.
All right. Is there a time frame we have to make a decision, or how do you decide when we launch?
Tom Wilson made the comment game day sort of decision.
Yeah, right.
Unfortunately, that's pretty much how it works. Now, we don't distribute the offering document, the disclosure document, unless we're in range of the savings that Mrs. Lane has authorized and that we've targeted, okay? And that she and I will advise her, and she will tell me if that's where we're going or not. I think it will be. So unless we're in that, over 8% present value area, that thing's probably not going out. As far as the things that are going on in the market with respect to the money market funds, the repo sort of panic and those things that are going on there, we think that was really very, very temporary. The Federal Reserve has managed to calm that down a little bit, but I don't want to stick my neck out too far. There are some underlying fundamentals that cause some concern there. What's that doing to interest rates? Really nothing too much to the interest rates that we are concerned about. Clearly it will help the transaction if that continues because it will drive very short-term rates, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4-year rates up. And that's where your escrow is. And the higher those rates are, the less you lose in the escrow. You might even make money in the escrow, which would increase your savings. So that this gets complex. It's complex. Anybody can understand it. But if you're not doing it every day, we're, instead of just dealing with a normal bond transaction where we just want to get the best rate we can, we're dealing with the taxable issue, the escrow issue, the timing issue, and the things that are going on in the marketplace. As far as quantitative easing goes, the Fed is right now not doing that except with respect to that short-term money market situation. So we're not really concerned about that. I do not predict interest rates. I mean, that's crazy for me to try to do. So that's why we set these targets. And sometimes you win, and sometimes sometimes you get the greatest savings in the world, but then 2 years later it could have been better, and sometimes you're lucky you got the savings because it never comes back. And, so that we could have a day-long conversation about the right target. We just know ours is somewhat conservative, we feel. I don't know if that answers any of your question, but there's just no way to answer the question as to what do we do. It's, all these experiences and follow the market. You have anything you want to add to that, Andrew?
No, other than, you're asking the right question. I mean, it's just as hard to time the bond market as the stock market. The reason we presented this is, we looked at a lot of different complex analytical tests, but the simplest being rates were and are very close to all-time lows on the U.S. Treasury long-term rates right now. That's a starting point. To comment on your question on the Federal Reserve, the federal funds rate is the shortest overnight lending rate. That was lowered earlier this week. The expectation is for it to be lowered again. But that has very little impact on long-term rates, which is where we're borrowing. That specific piece, I think we can set aside. Those short-term rates, while they may be lowered throughout the year, long-term rates generally aren't impacted too much by the Federal Reserve. As John said, we could get into a day-long conversation, but there are a lot of signs that say this is a good time to move forward. We're not refunding all of your outstanding debt, a portion. There will be some debt left over to refinance in the future. So kind of a dollar cost average type of situation where we're funding some now and leaving some for later. But a very good question that probably needs a little more time to be answered fully, but it's just kind of a starting point to answer your question.
We've taken a lot of time, and one more thing that I'd like to add is this is a negotiation. Interest rates are negotiated in this process by maturity. I am your representative in that respect. I'm negotiating for you, and Mrs. Lane has authorized me, I think also requested, I will be in New York City with the main bond underwriter during that negotiation. So that activity will be going on too.
Any other questions? Okay. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very much.
Good luck.